Okay, welcome back, everyone, to our final panel of the day, of day 2. I don't know if we'll get quite as spicy as we did this morning, but who knows? We're moving from feminine genius, which is a large and complex concept, to culture, another large and complex concept. So we'll see how spicy things get. So it's my duty to introduce our panelists. I'm going to leave it to you to read the specifics of their bio in the program and just sort of give you a general introduction to them. And then they will each speak for 8 or so minutes, and we'll have a conversation. Leah Libresco, you already know. I've been asked to remind you that the book raffle is still going on, if I don't steal the book overnight. So if you want to enter the raffle, go for that. The raffle is going to be pulled tomorrow morning. Okay, so the way we're going to move through this panel is we're going to move through thinking about a culture of life from the body, the female body, to the body politic. So that's how we've arranged our speakers. So our first speaker is going to be Sarah Lorio, who's a Ph.D. She's a podcaster, a part-time ethicist, and a speaker. She works for the National Catholic Center for Bioethics, and she has a Ph.D. and an MA in theology. Throughout the past 14 years, Sarah has taught both at the university and high school level. She's trained in 2 methods of fertility awareness, the Creighton model and the FEM model, and it's her passion to empower women through deeper knowledge of the great gift of their bodies. Our second speaker will be Sister Virginia Joy, and I do have a correction to make to her bio. She is a native of South Carolina and entered the Sisters of Life in 2009. I'm sure many of you are familiar with the Sisters of Life. They're a contemplative order founded by Cardinal, why am I blanking on his name? John Cardinal O'Connor, based in New York, but with ministries all over the country and internationally. Sister Virginia Joy served as the Respect Life Director for the Archdiocese of New York for many, many years. She is currently missioned in Washington, D.C. as the Sisters of Life Director of Services to Women. And finally, we have Kathleen Domingo, who is the Executive Director of the California Catholic Conference. In her role, she lobbies on behalf of the 12 Catholic dioceses in California, representing the bishops on a range of issues, such as human life and dignity, families, racial justice, healthcare access, housing, restorative justice, environmental justice, educational excellence, and religious liberty. So we're going to begin here with Sarah and move on down the line.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for your attention. I want to also thank Abigail Favale for the invitation. 3 quick comments, because I felt like I had more things to say in this morning, because it was exciting. One thing is, shout out to Helen Alvarez. She's never met me, but she spoke at a Given conference in DC in 2016, and I've rewatched that video multiple times, and it's been a gift to me. And Erica, I'm not sure if she's in the room right now, but also she gave a presentation. And then Sister Virginia Joy was my small group leader. Sorry, that's how I met her. But to all the young women in the room who are college or grad school, I just want to really encourage you that these sorts of things are truly formative, and you often leave with more questions than answers, and that's a good thing. And I want to encourage you that the seeds that are planted, the Lord is going to use. So you don't have to have all the answers figured out when you leave, like what you're doing with your life. But the things that give you a fire and an excitement, put those away somewhere, journal that, and see what the Lord does with it, because he is planting seeds this week. Also, 2 notes just from earlier today, really quick. First, I too, like Erica mentioned, was an athlete growing up, so I played softball, basketball, track, cross country, volleyball, all things, okay. Super intense, very competitive. And it was just before this sort of gender conversation came, so I never questioned, does this mean I'm more masculine, right? But I mean, I never put on makeup, I had my hair in a ponytail, I lived like that, and I was free as a bird, you know? And only when I took a women's studies class my freshman year of college did I encounter this sort of idea, right? On the first day of class, we had to go around the room and say our name, our biological sex, and our gender. And that's how I responded. I laughed very loudly, and then I was like, oh, she's serious? So I was like, my name is Sarah, I'm a woman, and I'm female. But my little Catholic bubble, so I'm from New Orleans, love it. We have really all-girls Catholic high schools and all-boys Catholic high schools. So my little all-girl Catholic high school bubble popped that day, and I was like, wow, this is what people think. So long story short, that was the seed that was planted for me as a biochemistry major that transferred to study theology and philosophy. I got my Ph.D. in bioethics, focusing on women's health and integrated sex education. And I say all that to say we can always learn from others, and there's always something to learn, and there's usually bridges that can be thrown even with those that we disagree with. So where can we find opportunities for dialogue? But in that, I wanted to say that we should always remember, I love the questions that we've had, that Christ and Our Lady exist for us as the new Adam and the new Eve. So within them, they show us the human capacity for what integration, which John Paul II talks a lot about, what integration, especially in the life of virtue, looks like. So when you think about Jesus at the fourth station of the cross, encountering his mother, in and through his very body, there's nothing less than tenderness in how he presents himself to her. And when we think of Our Lady, right, the gospel writers are very clear that she stood at the foot of the cross. In and through her very body, she is strong. And when John Paul II wrote on the gift of the laity, he often said about the threefold mission, priest, prophet, king. And so as women, we too are called to sacrifice. That's what it means to be priest. And help me in the room, any woman that you know has not suffered. Priest to offer sacrifice, prophet to speak truth, and king. And he says, Mulier stinitatem, to reign is to serve, and to serve is to reign. We have a great calling, a beautiful vocation as women. And if you want to know what the feminine genius looks like, in my very simple opinion, look around the room. It's all the wide array of colors of all the women in the room. So I just offer that to you as an encouragement. And I am a bioethicist, so the final little intro would be the lovely debate that just happened at the end of the last presentation. Total transparency, I do struggle with giving permission to embryo adoption. In my empathy, I want to say yes with like a full resounding gong, but I would be being dishonest about where I actually stand right now. I'm not saying that I will never be moved to a different position, but I wanted there to be clarity in the room as ethicists, what our job is. So I work with the National Catholic Bioethics Center. You can reach out to us for free, phone calls, emails, anything you are experiencing. If it falls within the realm of medical ethics, ask us. But we often get questions about this, and I just want you to know that the passion that was stirred up is a good thing. The church has not spoken definitively, no, you cannot do that we can say no. She hasn't spoken definitively, absolutely 100%, we should do this, and so now you have a moral responsibility to do it. She doesn't say that. So we're allowed to dialogue. We're allowed to converse, and this is healthy. And I just encourage you to take all this passion that we have as women for these little ones, take those to your politicians, because if there's one thing we can all agree on, and the thing that I think is objectively clear, is we've got to stop making these embryos. We got to stop it. Okay, back up. That was my intro, and I have like 4 minutes left. Okay. So, in my experience, so I share with you that I took this women's studies class. I have this love for medicine. I grew up with my mom as a nurse anesthetist in labor and delivery for 50 years, so I thought it was normal. Dinner table conversation to ask how many babies she helped deliver, right? Found out later that was not normal. But who I am was formed in large part by that fact that I was raised by a strong woman in medicine, right? And so I really am grateful for that influence that my mother had on me more than anything. But what happened was when I was 20 years old, I was shown a Creighton model intro session. So Creighton model, for those who are not aware, is a method of fertility awareness. It is one of many. I will not stand up here and tell you that one is better than the rest of them. I do not care which one you use. Let me be clear. I know, preach, right? Forget all the drama. If you find a way to learn more about your cycle, praise God and do what works for you. And I tell couples all the time, what works for you in your marriage, praise God. What works for you in your unique season. Because postpartum is very difficult on a hormonal level. If you have to switch methods, that's okay. That's not a moral question. Whatever works for you, please use it. But I was shown a Creighton model intro slide, and the slide that shows the difference between the estrogenic mucus and the progestin-induced mucus, I literally audibly said, and I keep quiet in a crowd, I was like, wow. I just said, wow. Because I knew that God had designed and created a woman's body. But then on the flip side, I knew I was called to teach this method, and so when I started teaching the method, what did I get most often? Phone calls from women who said, quote, I'm really paraphrasing, something along the lines of, hi, Father so-and-so said I had to call you because I'm getting married in a month, and to get married, I have to do this NFP class, so could you teach me? So how easy was that? Maybe she gets one cycle in one of the most stressful months of her life. Oh, I love talking to women. They're like, this is great. And I'm expecting her not only to have confidence in when she is fertile and infertile, but then to enter into marriage working with another person, right, who hopefully would also be with her to learn this. But I'm giving them a teaching that is difficult. Why am I giving it to them so late? So, like all good ideas I realized John Paul II had them first. And I learned that he said that we should be educating our children in what's called, he says really it's a remote preparation for children for vocation. So like in childhood, right? Your body is good. Like, we teach them the names of their body parts. We want them to know that. Do not let the culture steal these things and twist meaning. Words have meaning and they are beautiful and our bodies have dignity. Also, though, right, there's proximate preparation where he says we need to be giving timely biological information to our children, and this connects to their sexuality and the gift of their persons, right? And then the more immediate preparation, and that's marriage prep. So we got a little confused. I say that jokingly. In reality, we also have to appreciate as women, we live in an incredible time. Do you know how much information we have at our fingertips in 2025? 100 years ago? Absolutely not. So this is what I did. Brace yourselves. For my dissertation, I put Margaret Sanger and John Paul II into a dialogue. It was amazing. It was amazing. Over woman, her body, sex, motherhood, sex education. So I want you to, for a second, let go of all the things you think about her and know about her. I'm not here today to canonize her. I'm not here to condone her choices. But I am here to say we can learn from her, and learn from her we must. And just like the beautiful woman whose name I can't remember, which is horrible, who spoke about history, right? We have got to learn from our history. And so let's go into the history of Margaret Sanger, who started 109 years ago, Planned Parenthood started. It was not an abortion clinic. It was a birth control clinic. And why did she start it? Because she was a nurse who was really helping women in an immigrant population on the Lower East Side of New York City. And they were doing, brace yourselves, but they were doing abortions on themselves because they were so overwhelmed and they had no idea how to stop the babies from coming. And dare I say, this is sort of an unpopular opinion, but I have to be really honest and say it. Most of the women in our church today, if we're really listening to them, are asking the same question Margaret Sanger asked, which is, what do you have to say to me about this call to motherhood? I know it's good. I know it's beautiful. I know it's holy, but I'm only human. Because the church does not say you have to have 20 kids. She's never said that. She said you are called to a unique vocation in response to love with a capital L. His name is Jesus Christ. And your call and how many children you have is dependent upon your unique call, your unique vocation, the man that you marry, when he calls you to marriage. It's a beautiful tapestry of details that we must surrender to, but also receive as a gift. And so I found this need for dialogue. And I have this quote I'm going to read to you as my time is quickly going. I'm sorry, I promise I'm going to hurry. In 1930, Pope Pius XI wrote a document called Casti Connubii. You might be familiar with it. And what happened earlier that year was that the Protestant people, a certain sect of Protestantism, had actually started to say that you could use contraception for very intense reasons, like serious reasons, right? So again, they're kind of on the same page. We were all on the same page until this happened at the Lambeth Conference. So as Margaret Sanger did, her biggest opponent was the Catholic Church. Priests would shut down her talks at city halls and stuff. And I mean, you gotta admit, it was a really cool fight. You know what I mean by that fight? No blood, just trying to find a way to dialogue. My argument is that I wish someone would have listened to her from the church and actually listened to her. And so she wrote Pope Pius XI back. I don't know if you ever read it. This is what she said. It is a tower, so she's talking about as if he sits over his children from a watchtower. Now this is the Pope. Bold. She says, it is a tower set in splendor, surrounded by walls that shut out the world of broken homes of sick and sorrow-laden mothers, poverty-stricken fathers, and pathetic, unwanted children. In that remote tower, he sits comfortably, takes counsel from a pile of old books and from bachelor advisors, and then writes scolding sermons about the marriage problems of intelligent people. I wish he could come down into real life for a few weeks, walk the earth and mingle with the poor ye have always with you. He would hear true stories from Catholic, Protestant, and Jewish women, which I should think would be enough to shake sense into the head of any man. Now, if you're anything like me, there might be a little piece of you that at some point in your life, maybe, were you ever tempted to think the same thing? And maybe you didn't. I did. Just true confessions. I studied at a seminary, and sometimes are you kidding? You guys are wonderful and amazing, and you drive me crazy, right? It is a gift that God has given to us. No, we are not called to be priests, but we are all called to be women. And as women like Catherine of Siena, we can bring truth, right? We're called to be prophet. We're bringing truth into the conversation. And though it's an uncomfortable word, Margaret Sanger was also in her own sense a prophet. Hey, yeah, this is a great teaching. This is really hard for real people and real women on the ground. What are you going to do about it? And remember, in the 19-teens is the first time that we hear about hormones, which are basically chemical messengers within your body. They did not have any information before that. And remember, at that time, a woman legally bound to her husband within marriage, if she were to say no to him within the sexual sphere, could for good reasons fear that he might divorce her. And if he divorces her, she loses rights to property protection and potentially her children. That's a difficult situation. So what are you going to do when your husband says he wants to have intercourse and you're like, oh my gosh, I'm overwhelmed? You have the things we take for granted, the fact that we use the word ovulation, y'all, that is a grand luxury for us. We should be grateful. We should be grateful. And so we should take advantage of the fact that we can know that. And if you haven't learned something about it, you should start. But they didn't have that. They had none of that. Interestingly enough, when the rhythm method came out, which for the record, I do want to give some credit to these people. The rhythm method was an innovation, y'all. It's pretty phenomenal. No, it didn't work perfectly, I realize. Because not every woman's cycle is identical and the same and perfect according to our norms, right? Praise God. But it was an innovation. And so what ends up happening is Margaret Sanger, in the beginning of her career, started by wanting to educate women on the nature of their body. She actually wrote a series of articles, sex education articles, that I read. And I'm like, guess what, guys? 80 to 90% of it, I'm like, go Margaret. That was awesome. I wish I would have been given that in high school. But I wasn't. And so she's fighting for this education, and then she, over time, starts to believe that men cannot be capable of the responsibility of this question. And women were clamoring to her for the answers. Women wanted to shut down their fertility. We got to talk about that. Sometimes, right, if we did not have this conversation about freedom, we would have nothing to talk about with the pill. The pill is not fun to take. It has a vast array of side effects. So there must be something greater at stake if women are going to keep taking it and subjecting themselves to these physical and emotional side effects that are quite taxing. It's because we feel like our freedom is at stake. And this is where they differ. Margaret Sanger thought that freedom was the end. And eventually she thought the easiest way to get this is technology. So let's use technology, let's create a pill, and let's shut down our system that she has control. She created in her own right, like many people of the day, this sort of utopian idea that then it'll be, y'all, shit, man, if you could read her stuff, it's like, and then we'll just all live in this perfect realm where we only have children when we want to. Look how that worked out. 60 years with the pill, over 60 years, right? It is not 100% effective, and we still don't understand our bodies. The statistic that I was taught when I trained with FEM a few years ago is that only 3% of women in the whole world actually have confidence when they ovulate, know when they ovulate. We live in a first world country, and we lack basic biology. So let me hasten to the end of my point. John Paul II, my image was them having coffee. I know, I love coffee. But they were sitting at a table, and I was sitting and just listening. And I felt like what he did first was receive her, and he listened to her, and he would say, Margaret, I agree with you on this. You want what's best for women. I agree with you that they're tired. I agree with you that we must do better for them. But where I would disagree with you is that you think that technology is the key to woman being master of her destiny, and you're selling women too short. You're selling yourself too short. Because the greatest freedom I have as a human person, man or woman, but I live that out of my feminine potential, is that I have the capacity to know, to will, to choose, and the greatest choice that I can offer the world is love. And the greatest gift as women that we have, when I teach young women, so I taught high school, and I did a curriculum where theology of the body, philosophy, fertility awareness, they were charting their cycles. I mean, they had to for homework, so they did it. For some, it works. But what it opens up is that one of my favorite quotes, I say favorite quotes from JP2, I always get in trouble because there's 1,000. He said, freedom can only be lived within the limits of reality. Ladies, let me say that again. Freedom can only be lived within the limits of reality. Our bodies are a reality gifted to us, entrusted to us, that reveal us to ourselves. How great a gift is that? Our bodies are communicating with us. So when a woman is charting, I call her biological diary. There's a lot of beautiful things we can call it, right? But it reveals to me what's happening on the inside. There's a language my body is speaking, not just for the world, but for myself, so that what? I can grow in this gift of integration, which is a task entrusted to all of us as human beings. And what does that mean? The more I come to know myself, the more I come to possess myself, the more I can determine myself in the face of choices, and the more I can then more fully, the more I possess myself, the more fully I can offer myself as a gift to others. And that is integration. And so one of the closing quotes I want to offer to you from JP2, who said that sexuality is a value and task of the whole person, who said that we need to realize, right, I'm paraphrasing, but there's a real need for educating young people and a healthy awareness of sex and fertility, and that is my argument till my dying breath. We can do better for young people. Let's educate them. And for the record, in my research, I found Planned Parenthood had a bot at the time. I'm sure they still do. Its name was Rue. You could type any question you wanted to ask about sex, anything, sexuality. Is pornography okay? Is masturbation okay? Is oral sex okay? Whatever you want. It's not a question of our young people if they will find this information. It's when. If we want our children to learn, we must not run in fear from that which is difficult. We must realize it is a gift entrusted to us. It is our job to educate our children. When we educate on the body, we educate on the attitude of sex, the gift of sexuality. And so he said, people, and particularly young people, must be set free from the belief that sexual matters are an area of incomprehensible, well-nigh calamitous phenomena in which they find themselves mysteriously implicated and which threaten their equilibrium. Instead, we must reduce sex to a great set of phenomena, which, though of great moment and great beauty, are totally comprehensible and, so to speak, ordinary. This demands the timely provision of correct biological information. So in closing, what I want to offer to you is this vision that John Paul II offered, is that there is a greater freedom that woman can have, and it is through an authentic education of woman that we are body and soul, we are integrated in our very totality. And so we must receive, what my argument is for an integrated sex education, not on one side, which is comprehensive. Let's just give them all the ideas about contraception and birth control and just figure it out, which confuses kids, by the way. They're like, so you tell me to have sex or not? You're telling me to not, but you want me to be safe? Like, what do you want me to do? That's one side. The other side is what the church has largely done, which is abstinence only. I'm not saying that abstinence only shouldn't be a piece of the conversation, but if that's all we give them, I'm about to be super blunt, so prepare yourselves. If that's all we're given to a young man in a culture that is saturated with pornography and billboards of women scantily clad, and you cannot teach that young man that, guess what? You are literally biologically wired to respond to beauty. You will experience an erection a lot of times. I cannot understand that. It's never happened to me. There's not something wrong with you. It is not sinful. There is a difference, and this is John Paul II, the acting person, which people forget about, but it's the philosophical foundation for all this beautiful truth. These emotions, these attractions, these things that happen to me, they don't determine me. I'm free. I can choose in response to them. So I might experience an arousal. I'm a married woman. I might be attracted to another man. Oh my gosh, that's okay. Priests notice beautiful women. That's okay. Consecrated women, you notice attractive men. Praise God. It doesn't matter. That's how you were wired. It's what do you do with it? Do you take it, offer it to the Lord's heart, and then orient your reality to freedom can only be lived within the limits of reality. What is my reality? My vocation, the vows I have taken. I choose with my will, with my body, to respond in light of that reality, to offer myself in a gift of love, however it is appropriate. And so for women also, we do not need to be afraid of love or desires or attractions. But when we educate young women in their fertility, we give them a basis of knowledge that says, yes, when you are PMSing, you feel a little bit crazy. You are not crazy. I can give you an education that tells you, guess what? Your progesterone just dropped off a bit. Don't make big life decisions. Right? And it doesn't mean that the world then has to revolve around me like, gosh, y'all, wouldn't that have been great if the cross-country state meet every year was at the prime time of my cycle? That didn't work. I can't do that. But I orient myself to my reality. Right? And then I offer myself as the fullest gift I can in that moment. And I taught seniors how to chart, and so just so you know, this is possible, this is effective. I found them at the end of a track meet at 8 p.m. I was like, what are y'all doing? You got to get on the bus. And they're like, we have to chart our cycles, Miss Denny. Like, wait, we got to finish charting our cycles. And I was like, wow, they actually do it. And another young woman thanked me later, 18 years old, senior in high school. She said, Miss Denny, I wasn't married yet. She said, Miss Denny, thank you for teaching us how to chart. No one ever told me to wipe front to back. No, seriously. And I have had so many UTIs. And it's the first time in months I haven't had a UTI. So, our kids need the truth that we can teach them the beautiful gift of sexuality and the embodiment by giving them the truth of science and theology. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. I'm sorry I'm having a bad hair day. You can even have a bad hair day with a veil, just so you know. It happens. So, as Jess shared, for some of you who don't know the Sisters of Life, unlike the Franciscans we have present, the Dominicans, so many of you know, have this beautiful 800-year history. We date back to the 90s, also a good time. And we take a fourth vow. In addition to the 3 traditional vows, poverty, chastity, obedience, we take a fourth vow to protect the sacredness of human life. And we vow ourselves to that. We vow ourselves to the charism of life. And actually in our constitutions, we say we embody the church's response to the culture of death. So it's great to be a part of this panel. I'm so grateful to Abigail for the invitation. And we've done a lot of partnership with McGrath with the Into Life series. And some of actually what's in the Into Life series I'm going to kind of share with you this afternoon. So our work, and we walk with women who are pregnant and in crisis. We also are privileged to walk with women who have had abortions and are suffering that effect. And we have retreat ministry, we do evangelization, and lots of speaking again on the charism of life. But I'm going to kind of focus on our services specifically to pregnant women. And for us, Evangelium Vitae is like sort of the document or one of the documents that we turn to over and over again. And I always sort of joke, we get tagged as the pro-life sisters. We are pro-life. I'm sure these other sisters are pro-life too. But the charism of life, is so much bigger. It's so much bigger than a topic of human life issues. It's really, it's necessary for each one of you, to kind of unpack the charism of life, really how God's love, intimate love for each of you and how he sees you. And for us, I sort of draw the analogy that Evangelium Vitae sort of gets shelved as like the document on human life issues, when really it's this beautiful, it does cover human life issues, but it also is this beautiful scriptural meditation on man's origin and destiny, both founded in God's love. So it's a document that's really concrete and personal for every one of us. And sort of towards the end of the document, he actually says, Mary really reveals to the church that life is always at the center of a great struggle between good and evil, between light and darkness. And because of woman's close proximity to life, I think she too comes under attack in that particular way, in that struggle. He goes on to describe, obviously, what you've heard, the culture of life, the culture of death, and pulls those apart. And then he eloquently says, the heart of the tragedy being experienced by modern man is the eclipse of the sense of God in man. When the sense of God is lost, there's also a tendency to lose the sense of man, of his dignity and his life. In turn, the systematic violation of the moral law, especially in the serious matter of respect for human life and its dignity, produces a kind of progressive darkening of the capacity to discern God's living and saving presence. And he goes on, there's so much in this document, but one of the things he talks about, particularly for those people of faith, is a response to this tragedy would be a fostering of the contemplative outlook. And in number 83 of that document, he says, the contemplative outlook arises from faith in the God of life, who has created every individual as a wonder. It is the outlook of those who see life in its deeper meaning, who grasp its utter gratuitousness, its beauty, and its invitation to freedom and responsibility. It is the outlook of those who do not presume to take possession of reality, but instead accept it as a gift, discovering in all things the reflection of the Creator, and seeing in every person his living image. This outlook does not give in to discouragement when confronted by those who are sick, suffering, outcast, or at death's door. Instead, in all these situations, it feels challenged to find meaning and precisely in these circumstances, it is open to perceiving in the face of every person a call to encounter dialogue and solidarity. And that's, again, kind of the model for which we serve women. We have now had the privilege of walking with, over the years, thousands of women who are pregnant in, maybe what society would say, non-ideal circumstances. We've seen women make courageous decisions for life in sometimes tragic situations, really, really difficult situations. And we've witnessed countless transformations. Being transformed by motherhood, discovering within themselves a capacity for love and sacrifice that they didn't know they had, but also a strength, a creativity, a sensitivity that they had never tapped into. And I think when people, they're sort of mystified by religious in general, we get a lot of interesting questions. That's a whole nother panel discussion we could do with the religious here, what you've been confused for. But I'll always say, well, what do you do all day, And it's not based on any movies you've seen about religious life, I can guarantee that. But particularly in services to women, our approach is really that when a woman comes to us, vulnerable, pregnant, tempted, so often abandoned by those she trusted, in some ways it's so simple. We really love her, we love her. Not because we are good, but because she is so good and so worthy of being loved and accompanied. And we hope, we say we delight in her, we listen her back into life. We really try to look at her in such a way that we reflect sort of the goodness we see in her, that unique, irreplaceable quality about her. Like we really are trying to be mirrors and true to that contemplative outlook, really stand in wonder before this woman who is before us. And we really will ask for the Holy Spirit, to kind of move our hearts, to stir our hearts so that we can love and reflect back to her, that sort of unique characteristic, that spark of divinity that is unique only to her, that she carries and offers to the world and is usually completely unaware of. And this experience, we find, again, in order to recognize the life of the child she's carrying, to have any sort of recognition of its value, its worth, its dignity, its sacred quality, she has to see it first in herself. She has to know it about herself first. And we have seen, they can't necessarily articulate what's happening, but we've really experienced this giving them courage, and she's able to know what she deserves, leave relationships that are abusive, lifestyles that are degrading, and make heroic sacrifices, that her child might have life and that she might have new life, the fullness of life. So to give you just sort of a little illustration, I always feel like it's our duty to share stories because I was joking with Jess. I'm like, we get to bring the feminine genius to the streets, I've hosted feminine genius brunches in the Archdiocese of New York for about 5 years, and we had almost 4,000 women attend in that time. Everyone thinks I came up with the term. Obviously, the marketing department for the Archdiocese brought me in and was like, now, how did you come up with this? And I'm like, So, and again, I give a very elementary, offering of the feminine genius, but just to say that this message is so vital, and women are just really dying to hear even the little bit of truth about the feminine genius. So, I just offer that. But so to share a couple of stories from some of the women. One woman in particular came to us, was very adamant about having the abortion. I think she only came to see us because a friend kind of made her. So she comes, she's talking with us, tells us right off the bat she's going to have the abortion. And again, we're receiving her, loving her. She ends up staying for 4 hours. At any point she could have left, but her heart's being moved in some way, and she can't articulate it. And she leaves the meeting still saying she's going to have the abortion, but also clearly lighter in appearance. And, as Sisters of Life, we always follow up with the women, the next day. I mean, we're walking with these women day in and day out, multiple times a day. We're in contact with them, as much as they need or will engage. But we couldn't beat her to it. She calls us the next day just to check in, and she was still going to have the abortion. And again, this continued for almost 2 weeks until she finally called us. She came back in several times. Finally called us and she says, "I'm going to do it." And of course, we're like, "What are you going to do?" And she's like, "I want to have this baby." And just kind of unpacked, a little bit of what was happening in her own heart. So that just gives you a sense of just to be received, this capacity of being present to her and receiving her in such a way that she receives herself. And then the other, just to end with one other story, I was really privileged to live for almost 8 years in our house with pregnant women. Getting to know them in I just have countless stories about some of these moms, but I'll just share one because it really pertains and kind of captures many stories in one. So I'll call this woman Maya. And Maya is one of those people who never needs to read the book, How to Win Friends and Influence People. I mean, she's the life of the party and the life of the convent even. So after one regretted night, she took the morning after pill and was shocked by the positive pregnant test weeks later. She already had several abortions and couldn't believe Plan B had failed. Days of uncertainty passed when one night she had this mysterious, vivid dream. In the dream, she saw herself in chains, wrapped all around her. She's struggling, miserable, incapable of movement. Suddenly, a little child comes in, walks up to her, and unlocks the chains. She woke up. It was like scales fell from her eyes. She called us, and for the sake of the baby, sobered up. She moved in with us, and she knew instinctively she didn't want to bring her pornography with her either. And we helped her sign up for one of those Covenant Eyes programs. The sisters, we had just started an amateur little study group on John Paul II's letter to women. And out of sheer curiosity, she joined. So a couple weeks in, we're strolling through Central Park with her, and she bumps into her old party crew. And they say, "What's with the nuns?" At this point, she dismisses us graciously. Sisters, I'll meet you at home. So she stayed, and they're like, "What happened?" She says, "Jesus has me under house arrest, and I'm loving it." When her child was born, she named him Matthew John Paul. Matthew, gift of God. John Paul, as she said, for the greatest man I ever knew. She had him baptized a Catholic on the 8th day, the day of new creation, and she became Catholic that Easter. Her chains gone forever. So I get choked up just thinking about her because I can picture her. Like Abigail, I do melt in my own talks as well. Yeah. But what felt like, again, as Melissa kind of talked about, like how, society pits the woman against the preborn, against her own child. Like what we see again and again is that the child saves her life. And it's this mutual, just recognition of the gift, of the need for one and the other. And so again, just to share that with you as a kind of a glimpse into what we're privileged to see. And we feel so committed in sharing stories because we know it's the prayers of so many that provide the grace for these women to make such heroic choices and really difficult things And I'll just end by saying, too, that piece that John Paul II says in regards to solidarity, it's not just for when the woman is pregnant. Really, our founder was very adamant about, that we would be committed to be in their lives for as long as they needed us. So we have kids in college now that were born at the convent, that we've helped to move into college. So yeah, we're a part of their life as long as they need us, and maybe it's a coming and going, but that's really what's needed in terms of solidarity, not just at the moments maybe where they're most vulnerable, but throughout.
See, since I knew I was on a panel with a Sister of Life, I knew not to wear any eyeliner today.
Me either.
I'm really glad that this is a panel discussion, because I think creating a culture of life is something that depends on many, many pieces within the culture. It depends on knowing our bodies. It depends on the witness, particularly for babies, on maternity homes, on sidewalk counseling. And if we're thinking of that metaphor of the body, of all the parts, the hands, the feet, I want to talk about one of the more obscure but still necessary parts of a culture of life, which is an openness to death. And the image I want to come to, or start with from the Gospels here, is the image of the women at the tomb. That their faith in Christ sustained them to what looked like the end. That they went to the tomb, with burial spices, out of pure love for him, with no expectation of anything else Christ could do for them at this moment, but so formed by his love that they were prepared when many of the disciples were in hiding just to be present with his body, and that alone would be enough for them. And I want to come to this image of openness to death and hope in death as the foundation for our openness to life, because I think this is what profoundly marks the experience of pregnancy and people's fear about it. There's a quote that I returned to a lot while pregnant, which wasn't from the Bible or from JP2. It was from the novel A Tree Grows in Brooklyn. Yes, I see people who also love this novel, yes. And the quote is, "When a woman has a child, death holds her hand for a little while, and sometimes he doesn't let go." My husband did not think this was a reassuring quote to meditate on while I was pregnant. And when we went to the hospital, he was really not pro that the song I wanted to listen to was the Avett Brothers' The Carpenter, which has as part of the chorus, it's a song about life and death, and has as the chorus, "When the black robe drags along the ground, I'll be ready to surrender and remember we're all in this together." But the part I wanted to hold on to, "If I live the life I'm given, I won't be scared to die." Because I'm a statistician. I knew the odds were very, very low that this is what would be asked of me. But I also knew that this was kind of the closest brush with death that I could anticipate having. And for me, as a mom who was going in with the first child who had made it out of the first trimester, after 6 children who hadn't, there was just no way that pregnancy wasn't something that was intimately bound up with death for me. And that's where I think, part of our challenge is to tell, the full truth about openness to life, which is every time a woman conceives a child, she brings a new life into the world. And with that child, she welcomes, almost at the very moment of the conception, the death that child will one day undergo. And that part of the job of a mother and a father is to form their child, not just for a happy childhood or a good marriage or a vocation to religious life, but to eventually, at some unknown moment, die in friendship with Christ. And it's only by being prepared for death and thinking of that as part of what we welcome in welcoming life, that first of all, we're prepared to welcome the full suite of lives we might be asked to mother or father, and that we're prepared to know what we're fully asked to do as parents. And that for me, a lot of my challenge as a mother was saying, I love this child, and my love is sufficient for God for this child, however long their life may be. But my love is not actually sufficient to make them live. That's a different thing than what my love is actually directed for. And I think one of the themes we've had throughout this conference is this, challenge to not try and make the mystery smaller than it is, to try and not make God's work smaller than it is in making us. And I think our culture is so frightened of death that it's a real hindrance to our ability to love others and ourselves. And I think we see that both at the beginning of life, when a quiet, invisible death in the womb is preferable to a hard life, where we don't know enough about what that life will look like, and people choose the certainty of death over the possibility, the fraught possibility of life. And we see it at the end of life, when increasingly we see a focus on euthanasia as a death with dignity, with the implication being that an unchosen, unorchestrated, unauthored death, a death that we don't control, is an undignified one not befitting a human person. And I think to give an account of our lives and our friendship with God has to involve an openness to the full range of lives and deaths he may prepare us for. This is a particularly womanly task because women are so intimately linked to both the growing of life and the potential for death in the womb. The grief for a man and a woman is similar, but the physical experience of miscarriage is different. It was me, not my husband, who had the experience of every time I went to the bathroom being afraid to see blood. And he, not me, who had the different fearful experience of waiting to hear if something was happening in my body that I would then have the responsibility of giving the bad news to him. I love what Abigail said this morning about the calling to be sentinels of the invisible. And I think that's essential because more and more people are being pushed into invisibility in our culture. The unborn always are at risk in this way. Their faces not known to us, but for 4D ultrasounds and all that newfangled stuff, but not fully known to us till birth. Their personality hidden from mother, father, doctor, relying on our faith in them to kind of complete the work of knowing them. But more and more, the elderly, the disabled, are being encouraged to become invisible, to end their own lives. Right now in England, they're debating an assisted suicide bill where, after rounds of amendments, they've agreed that if they pass it, both doctors should be able to proactively bring up assisted suicide when the patient hasn't asked, and that it's sufficient reason to choose assisted suicide if it's simply to not burden others or because of the potential financial cost of care. So if we're called to be sentinels of the invisible, our job has widened. And I think that we can only give hope if we are proactively witnessing to the hope of a good death as part of an abundant life. And I want to highlight, since we've heard from the Sisters of Life, 2 religious orders, I think, do a beautiful job witnessing in this way, who aren't here at this conference. The Hawthorne Dominicans care for the indigent poor who are dying of cancer. And they're a little short on vocation. So I would encourage every young woman here who is not engaged or actively dating to look at their website and just ask God, for a second, is this something you might ask of me? Whether or not it feels like something fitted you, just open the question and see what happens. But when people bring their relatives to the sisters, unable to pay for care, one of the things that my friend there told me is that the family is often offering an apologia for their relative. They go, okay, well, he can't do this anymore, but he was very funny, or he was very smart, and kind of making sure they're justifying why the sister should love them. And they're doing this because they've received a catechesis from their doctors up till this point, where to advocate for their parent means desperately pleading for their doctor to see them as a person and kind of stacking up as many things as they did in their health as possible to justify treating them as a person now that they don't have those capacities anymore. And the sisters are willing to hear these stories, but they don't care. They say, our job is to love this person right now, whoever they are, and the fact that they were created by God is enough for us. But they see that the families don't have faith that their parents would be received in love, but for kind of folders worth of evidence to show, no, they were a person once. Please grant them personhood a little while longer in their infirmity. And the other group I would highlight are the Trappists at New Melleray Abbey who make coffins. and who not only make them, as an offering of love for everyone who's buried in them, but who offer their caskets for free for any parent who loses a child before or after birth. And I visited them, and I've seen them working in their workshop. I've seen how they unite their physical labor with prayer. And I've heard the stories about how simply burying people with dignity offers a counter witness to a world that doesn't expect it. About parents who received their miscarried remains in plastic bags or styrofoam coolers, and who showed up, holding a coffin to place them into, and the nurses who had never seen a body received that way, still as a gift, now make referrals to the Trappists when a family comes in mourning to say, oh, there's something else we can do for your baby. And I want to give one piece of homework, bearing in mind the time, to everyone in this room about how to witness for the goodness of life by being unafraid of death and of loving till the end. I'd like folks to raise your hand if you have a living parent still with you. That's me too. And keep your hands up. No, higher. I'd like you to keep your hands up if you've had a substantive conversation with one of your parents about how you can best support them when they come to the end of their life. And this is a much higher share that stayed up, I expect, than in many other rooms I could be in. And the homework I want to give folks is to pick a time to have that conversation, because it's so hard to come to the end of life in trust, even as a Catholic, without compassion, without people who are going to suffer with, who are going to be at the tomb, who will love till the end, and who see our faith in abundant life as rooted in Christ's victory over death. That there is no life we're afraid to welcome, no matter how short, how disabled, how painful, if every life is rooted in that promise of victory through the cross. But to do that, we have to be able to lead with the cross as our success story. That there's nothing that can alienate us from Christ, and no tomb or depth of suffering where he has not been there first and is waiting for us, arms cruciform extended.
Honestly, Jess, I don't know why you put me at the end. This is rough. Let's all recognize. You're all crying now, and that's good. So I think I was actually put on the end to kind of be the cautionary tale, to be honest, about a little bit about all the things we've discussed over the last few days. If we don't do those things, like, what's going to happen? I think that's why I'm here. So I work in California. I work with all the bishops of California. They're fantastic, wonderful guys. I know this is being recorded. Hi, bishops. I like you. It's okay. No, they are. They're lovely. And so what I get to do every day is go and represent them and the Catholic Church at the California legislature, which is also very interesting, right? And so it's a wonderful thing to be able to do. It's a wonderful act of evangelization, to be able to take the gospel into a place that doesn't often hear the gospel, and to be able to share a different perspective. But there are a number of things that I've learned in my time doing that. And so I kind of just want to share a little picture and talk about how we can get involved in building a culture of life in this other particular way. So we talk a lot about that sort of great flight from religion, right? About the rise of the nuns. And we know that for every one person who enters the church, 8 people leave. And if you don't know that, well, now you do. So there are real consequences to that, right? And we've been talking about some of those consequences, but I want to really concretize what we've been talking about a little bit, because I think that one of the most obvious consequences that I've seen of people losing their religion, right? Losing their faith, not having that grounding, is a loss of an understanding of humanity, of who they are, of who we all are, of who we are and what we're made for. And that has some serious consequences in the public square, right? So when we don't know who we are, we lose a sense of our dependency as creatures. We talked about a lot of this stuff. We lose our sense of a community of persons, communio personarum, about the need for loving other people. We lose all of those things. Our humanity, we know know is based on interpersonal relationships and complementarity and love, but these terms are not necessarily understood in this very individualized society where self-actualization is the goal, right? And so yesterday we referenced Gaudium et Spes 24. Today I'd like to bring up John Paul II's second favorite Gaudium et Spes quote, Gaudium et Spes 22, just as kind of a way to open us up. Gaudium et Spes 22 says, "The truth is that only in the mystery of the incarnate word does the mystery of man take on light. For Adam, the first man, was a figure of him who was to come, namely Christ the Lord, the final Adam, by the revelation of the mystery of the Father and his love, fully reveals man to man himself and makes his supreme calling clear," right? So right there in Vatican II, we have this wonderful, beautiful, many of you probably know that quote by heart, example that we learn that Jesus is the person who reveals ourselves to us, right? It's through an understanding of him and through a love of him and adoration of him and knowledge of him that we get to know who we are. So if you remove that from people's existence and people are just out in the world kind of trying to figure out who they are, we have exactly what you all see every day, right? As you're scrolling through Instagram, or is TikTok even a thing anymore, and X and all that, right? You're encountering all these people who don't know who they are, and you are trying to literally figure it out on a daily basis. Can you imagine how exhausting it must be to wake up every single morning and have to figure out your identity that day? Like, I would just stay asleep. So I want to talk a little bit about the California experience. For the past 15 years in California, we've had a supermajority of Democrats in California, and I'm not trying to be partisan, but just to say that it's an experiment, right? We've had 15 years of sort of very ultra, the Democrats kind of in leading, right? And doing what they want to do under this kind of progressive leadership. And that there are a number of really great things that the bishops of California support under this progressive leadership, right? We're very happy with our policies on immigration, on social safety net, on housing, on anti-poverty initiatives. We have a lot of great things going on in California. But then we also have a lot of challenges. And before I get to the challenges, I just want to make sure everyone knows California is lovely. If you haven't been, I would encourage you to visit. If it's been a while, please come. San Francisco is not a cesspool. It's gorgeous. It's lovely. Tahoe, Monterey, San Diego, you can't go wrong, okay? We still have Napa Valley. San Diego, right? Honestly, it's beautiful and it's lovely, so please don't get the wrong impression. Sometimes people I run into in California, or in Sacramento, just wandering around, and I'll ask, where are you from, or whatever. Oh, Ohio. They say, I've never been to California before. I thought it was going to be terrible. It's lovely here. And so I said, oh, yeah, where do you get your news? Anyways, it does say a lot about how they kind of view California. But in spite of maybe, or amidst, I should say, all of our natural beauty and the resources and the great fun there is to be had in California, we do have a lot of challenges. And I want to talk a little bit about that. We have the distinct challenge of a homelessness crisis that's out of control, right? Very famously. Y'all have homeless folks. We got a lot of homeless folks. We have the highest incarceration rates in the country. We have the highest number of children in our child welfare system. So again, 15 years of very intense progressive politics, and this is where we are, right? So it's kind of rough. Also, just last week, we learned that our education, our test scores in California, this is rough. So is anyone here from Alabama? Okay, that's great. I'm excited for you. Okay, but Alabama used to be kind of, lower test scores, right? And so it was always the kind of thing where you'd be like, well, at least we're not as bad as Alabama. Guess what, though? California's worse than Alabama now. So we have that amazing distinction. So good job, Alabama. Right, okay. So we're far ahead in a lot of other ways, though. Like I said, we have great social safety nets. We have just exemplary parental leave programs. We have excellent mental health care in California. We have these really incredible social safety nets for women and children and families. And I want to make this point because so often we hear this narrative that red states who criminalize abortion or limit abortion as much as possible don't have social safety nets, and so you're really putting women in a bind, right? But then blue states who offer abortion often don't have or have these resources, and so we're being very open-ended and open-minded and all these things. I want to say that it's a real paradox because we have so many social programs and we have so many social safety nets for women and children and families, and yet we have one of the very highest abortion rates in the nation. I think we're right up there with New York, right? And so I really want to help folks understand and combat the narrative that says that women are choosing abortion because they don't have these social safety nets, because that's just not true, right? That's not true. And it plays out in California every day. So we have to ask ourselves, what is it that we do? So Catholic social teaching offers very clear guidance on how we sort of approach all of these things. And I would say that in the legislature, what we're seeing the states kind of try to jump in and fix things, and what they're doing is they're just grasping at straws. They don't have any clear vision of who human beings are, and so when we talk to them about concepts from Catholic social teaching like the common good, like subsidiarity and solidarity, it doesn't compute, because in order to understand the common good, you have to understand who people are, what's good for man, in order to understand what's the common good, right? What is man made for, in order to know what we should do to help people out. And we don't have those kinds of conversations. And so it really is a big challenge. So I want to just give you a couple of examples. In the years since the Dobbs decision, California was one of the very first states to enact through a ballot initiative an abortion constitutional amendment. And I'm going to just read you the language so you can hear. It's just kind of silly. It says, "The state shall not deny or interfere with an individual's reproductive freedom and their most intimate decisions, which includes their fundamental right to choose to have an abortion and their fundamental right to choose or refuse contraceptives." So what does that even mean, right? We're not going to interfere with an individual's reproductive freedom and their most intimate decisions. I mean, that's just kind of nonsense, right? That's not even good policy language. But then the two things that we pull out from that is, we're not going to stop you from having or you get to have an abortion, and we're not going to stop you from using contraception. So other things that you might want to do intimately, you're on your own. That same year, 22 laws were passed in California expanding abortion access, the abortion workforce, and abortion funding. So very famously, California now pays for pretty much all abortions that take place in our state, whether you're from California or you travel to California. We'll also pay for you to travel to California. We'll put you up in a hotel, and we'll provide childcare while you're having an abortion in California. So tell your friends. We talk about this all the time with the legislature as reproductive coercion, and this is why. When you live in a place where every single conversation is about abortion, where every single thing the state does is about abortion, even though we have these robust social safety nets, what are women constantly thinking about? They're thinking about abortion. And it becomes so crazy. The state of California has a $1 million annual fund to advertise abortion in California. $1 million of taxpayer money just to advertise abortion. That's not to pay for abortion, which we already do. It's not to fund everybody who does abortion. It's just to advertise that we have abortions. So it really is troubling. Also, at the same time in California, we're having trouble with maternity wards and the closing of OBGYN services in California. We have 52 maternity wards that have closed since 2012, half in the last 3 years, and there's a good percentage of Californians who live kind of in rural areas who have to travel 3 or 4 hours just to get to an OBGYN, right? So we're in a place where abortion is the choice, and we're failing at reproductive health care that is helpful for women, that women are really wanting and looking for. And it's really interesting, in a lot of our kind of more rural newspapers, there are stories of women saying, hey, I can't find a doctor to deliver my baby, but in this tiny little town, there are 3 places I can go to get an abortion, or, all kinds of things. So it really is very difficult. And I just want to share one little anecdote, because abortion coercion is a real thing, and it's happening to women who we may know. So in this one area of downtown Los Angeles, there's a 1 mile radius where there are 5 abortion providers. It's not in a great part of LA. It's largely immigrant community, largely Spanish-speaking population. They actually pass out coupons in Spanish for women, like 20% off today, da-da-da. Only in Spanish, though. It's terrible. So what we were finding is that there's the Catholic Church there. You know, most of these women will go to Mass at the parish. And there's this group of people who go every day to some of these facilities, and they do sidewalk counseling, they pray outside. And they would see people, women, usually with toddlers in tow, going to the abortion facilities. And so they started talking to them because they knew them, recognized them from Mass. And the stories really had a very similar arc. And it was this, that most of these women were migrants, didn't have a lot of resources, hooked up with someone they thought could help them and left them with the baby. Maybe hooked up with someone else they thought could help them and left them with the baby. They're working as many jobs as they can possibly get, right, to couple enough money to just keep a roof over their head, and now they're pregnant again. Now, these women would tell these folks that they met outside, I know that if I go have an abortion, I will go to hell. I know that's a mortal sin, and I know that I will go to hell for that. But I have to do that because these children that I already have will starve if I don't. That is abortion coercion, and no one talks about that, but it happens all the time. Now, of course, you know, pastorally, these folks would say, okay, first of all, we're gonna help you to understand that you're not gonna go to hell for this, okay? Let's talk about all of these things. But that's what these women were carrying, and how many of them actually went through with that and fully believe that that is their destiny because they were just trying to help their children survive. So I could go on and on, but in the interest of time, I wanna stop there, but just, I want, with my stories about California, but not with the final word, because I have to leave us with some hope, right? So why are we talking about this at a women's conference? I think that John Paul II has a lot to say, and I want to quote just a couple things quickly from him. In Mulieris Dignitatem, he says, and remember, this was written a while ago. He says, at this moment, which could be today also, when the human race is undergoing so deep a transformation, women imbued with the spirit of the gospel can do so much to aid humanity in not failing. Just not failing, right? I mean, that's kind of a low bar. Okay, so let's work on that. And then he also has a couple great passages from his letter to women. I'm going to read this from this chapter 12, or the 12th section. He says, for in giving themselves, and he's speaking of women, to others each day, women fulfill their deepest vocation. Perhaps more than men, women acknowledge the person because they see persons with their hearts. They see them independently of various ideological or political systems. They see others in their greatness and limitations. They try to go out to them and help them. In this way, the basic plan of the Creator takes flesh in the history of humanity, and there is constantly revealed in the variety of vocations that beauty, not merely physical, but above all spiritual, which God bestowed from the very beginning on all, and in a particular way on women. And to me, that is the genius of women, right? Is that we have that ability. We don't have to argue over where it resides. We have that ability to see the person and to make sure that humanity doesn't fail. Thank you.
Thank you to all our panelists. In the interest of time, I'm going to ask just one question and hopefully get 30-second responses, and then open up the floor to questions. So I'm going to preface my question with a little bit of background. So 20 years ago, Alistair McIntyre gave 2 lectures a year apart, one on the culture of death and one on the culture of life at the Ethics and Culture conferences. And in the lecture on the culture of death, but I think this would apply to, in the same degree, to the term culture of life, he talked about these being moments of great rhetorical power. And he goes on to say, as with any moment of great rhetorical power, they're also dangerous. And I think he says this because he goes on to say that we lack because when we use these terms in the public square, they lack the explanatory power we think they have. So you have all laid out really important and beautiful visions of how the culture of life is instantiated in particular ways. And I think all of what each one of you has said has the seeds of how do we make this vision intelligible to people out there, because we're all going back out there at some point, tomorrow or Saturday, to those that we interact with, work with, live with, who do not share the same ethical, metaphysical apparatus that we may. 30 seconds.
Okay, 30 seconds. So I would say from my perspective, so when I was writing my dissertation, I would sometimes go to coffee shops and I have to speak to a barista, right, about what I'm doing. Science is the greatest bridge, at least in terms of sex education. I think when you talk to a woman about the gift of empowering her through knowledge, women desire this truth and they want to know how their bodies work. And so I can talk about Jesus without ever using his name, because he's the divine creator and author of our sexuality and our gift as women. And so I think don't be afraid of the gift of science and the truth of what that can offer, especially in relation to sexuality.
I was pro-choice and I was a Planned Parenthood donor. And what made a difference to me was not seeing pro-lifers on TV. It was knowing people individually who were up to field question after question, who understood that I was suspicious of them and didn't resent my suspicion of them, and who embodied love for others, not just even on their pro-life front, but who I could grow to trust. And so just like I want you to all bother your parents, right? Like I want you to all blow up your friendships. I think the culture won't change unless people have a personal witness from someone they trust. Mm-hmm. And I think that, there's a real reason that J.D. Vance said in the VP debate, the pro-life movement doesn't have the trust of America and has to earn it. And I don't think that only will come from the top, it comes from individuals. So if your friends don't know you're pro-life, tell them and then, duck. But pray for the Holy Spirit to help you, because yours is the face of the movement to them, and think about what their alternative face is if you won't show yours.
Okay, I sort of wear my cards on me, so yeah, there's no I can't be inconspicuous very well, but so I guess the word I would use is reverence, like that, being able to ask yourself, how are you reverent towards yourself, and how are you reverent towards others? I mean, I just think, basically, along with Leah, it is going to be the witness of others. I think, when people meet us and, know what we do, people are like, oh, sisters, I'm so excited to see you. And then when I say I work with women who are pregnant, they're like, I cannot believe you do things like that. But if I can actually dialogue with them and share with them a little bit about how we serve and receive them, I can take their anger and again, engage in dialogue. So I would just use that word reverence and being able to examine yourself with how do you reverence those who are around you, whether it's the guy honking at you or your coworker, your spouse, your family members.
So I would just suggest to use the language of human dignity. We know what that word means, and a lot of people out in the culture use the term dignity, but they don't necessarily know what it means. It's okay, you can capitalize on that. Help people to recognize what you're talking about when you're talking about maybe a homeless person, someone in foster care, kind of a politically neutral. Help them recognize that you're helping that person because of their human dignity, and then weave that in to other situations. You can help them to connect those dots. That person has human dignity, this person has human dignity, this person has human dignity over here. They might put up resistance, but when you help them weave those together and show that consistency, it oftentimes will work.
Hello, thank you all so much for your beautiful witnesses. I'm going to med school in the fall, and I am very committed to being a pro-life physician, not just as a physician who won't do A, B, and C, but a physician who genuinely sees the patient as Christ, to which I minister. So I've been thinking about that a lot, but I think that you would all have something really interesting to say to those going into healthcare, those already in healthcare, because so many of these questions intersect with that field so profoundly. So I'm curious if you could each say something about like how we do that better on the ground in healthcare as physicians, nurses, PAs, etc.
I'll just start really quick. I would say John Paul II, if you read Witness to Hope, George Weigel talks about this experience when he broke his hip and how the medical professionals were like talking around him, but not to him, you know? And at one point he had to make clear, like, hey, still here, you know? So remember, it's a philosophical word, but it's easy for you to understand, right? Of like the person as subject, right? Like I participate in my care. And so it's what we've been saying all along really is like the gift of woman is to take the person in. And it's not just these actions that I'm doing upon this body, but that it's this person, so the whole of the person. And I would just say from personal experience as a patient, this is in my recent experience when I had to do a lumpectomy, right? So I found a lump, I had to take it out, everything was fine. But the resident who came in first was like, oh, this is gonna be over 2 centimeters, so you should get a double mastectomy. And I was like, what? Now, he doesn't know what I know, right? I thank God that I'm formed enough to know. But also the culture, right, is like our breasts have function as women. Like I'm a married woman, I want to have children, I want to breastfeed my children. The cosmetics is not the only thing. And so my point is not cosmetics. My point is he was like trained in what he's trained in. And so to remember the subject that it's a conversation. It's not just you should do this. It's ask questions and get to know the person as you're giving them that. And also, please don't forget the resource of the National Catholic Bioethics Center. Any ethical quandary you fall into, we exist for you. I'm serious, and it's free. So please reach out to us if we can ever be of help to you.
I co-signed the Bioethics Center. It was a great comfort to me to know I could call the hotline as a patient. And I would say to you, the first thing is thinking about what kind of prayer life can sustain such like busy and emotionally difficult work. The book I'd recommend is Robert Cardinal Sarah's The Power of Silence, because if you can be someone who carves out peace, not only for yourself, but for coworkers who don't have that, it will help them keep their humanity in the midst of trying to live a life of service. And the other book I really like is Slow Medicine by Victoria Sweet, who's really formed by Hildegard von Bingen, and I see you're familiar, because she starts with a love of the goodness of the created body and thinks about doctoring as working in partnership with the patient and their body to restore equilibrium, where the body is part of doing the work, not just a malfunctioning jukebox the doctor has to kick. And I think that really helps her as a doctor keep in mind both the goodness of the body in front of her and the limits of what she can do as a doctor, so she's prepared to accept them when the end comes.
I'm going to give the nun response. So I would say don't be afraid to pray. Like whether it's a secular hospital or not, even you're allowed to pray privately and do the sign of the cross and let them see you pray before you do something. Or you could wear a medal. I had a dear friend who had a double lung transplant. When she woke up, the first thing she saw was the miraculous medal on her nurse at Duke Hospital. And it gave her the most peace, and it was just this transformative experience. And my own experience with family members in the hospital, I had a Baptist doctor. Again, I'm a nun, and he was like, "Can I pray with you all?" Of course, this is a license to prayer, but not everything will be this obvious. But I just think, they're at such a critical moment, a vulnerable moment, and it's actually what an opportunity to share a moment of faith that and that really acknowledges just more than their physical. Like it acknowledges really their soul that you desire to care for. So
I would just, as someone who advocates for Catholic healthcare and such, just say be really proud of providing excellent quality care for the whole person. Don't shy away from that. Don't be like, oh, well, no, I don't do those other things. Just be super excited and happy and proud of the good care that you're going to provide.
Thank you all so much.
Hi there. I just want to thank you for getting your hands dirty kind of responses to what we think about the cultural life. I was wondering if in all the populations that you're working with, and I'm surprised we haven't talked about it yet here in this conference, but the vulnerable population that really seems to be affecting, I think, women more than men, which is, this identity in LGBTQ, right? So I just think a vulnerable, disenfranchised, marginalized population, as a church, if we don't walk out of here tomorrow with some kind of pastoral response and shared resources, ideas, I just think it's a real missed opportunity. So I would be grateful. And maybe if it doesn't affect your work or you don't have anything to say, no problem. But if you do, I think it'd be great to speak on that.
I'd really recommend the work of Eve Tushnet and the team at Building Catholic Futures, who I so admire. And her focus, and the reason it's been helpful to me as a married woman as well, is, she always uses the framing of no one has a vocation of no. Everyone is called to live a life of full and total self-gift. And whether you're someone who identifies as lesbian or gay, whether you're someone who wants to be married and is formed for marriage, but isn't getting married, whether you're someone who lives a long life or a short life, is how I think about it. Everyone is called to a life of total self-gift, and no one is waiting for marriage to be that opportunity, and if they don't have it, they won't get it. So her focus is on what does abundant life look like in those circumstances. And again, her work meant a lot to me while I was having miscarriages, because it was about having a kind of love I desperately wanted to be able to give and not be able to give it in the way I wanted to, and knowing that God's answer to me was never no. His answer was always more love.
I would say in my work, so like earlier formation, I hate to give into a stereotype, but I played travel softball, and there was a lot of same-sex attraction, like in my own dugout. Pretty dramatic at times. And it wasn't all bad. I mean, honestly, I was growing up in a time that I was like, well, I guess I got to get used to it, I saw Rent, like, in the movie theater, and I was like, oh, like, I had a desire to love these people, And I think there's a beautiful purity to that desire, and we need to keep that. We don't want to lose that. But I consider it a grace, because I remember a friend of mine on the bus just, like, telling me she was having these attractions. We were watching Lord of the Rings, and she's like, I think I like so-and-so. And I was like, what's happening? And I was 16. Like, what am I going to say? What did I know? Not much. But I remember in that moment, the only thing I knew how to do was listen. And it ends up being that, honestly, still today, the best thing I can say for all of us is to listen. And I have, in my work, we do have a lot of people that email us at the National Catholic Bioethics Center. Either I have children or I have grandchildren. I'm trying to figure out how to walk with them and, like, what do I do? And the number one thing I say is listen. Because without truly listening, like Christ is in every single person, and we all have our stuff. And it may not be as visible or as, like, vocal, but it's there. And so it's not a place of judgment, it's a place of invitation, like asking questions, like getting to know that person as a person. And we also have people that email us who have already gone through sex change operations and then regret their choice. And they're like, what do I do now? And I think there's also a place within the church. It's messy. I don't have all the answers. That's not what I'm saying. But what I'm saying is a place of welcoming of some of our struggles are more external and some of our struggles are more internal. But no matter what a person's struggle is, as an ethicist, my job is never to tell someone what to do. My job is to offer to them the truth, right? As a gift and an invitation to love in a way that only they can respond to, because I'm not them. Like, they are this unique, incommunicable, intransferable gift, right? In who they are. And then I have to trust and allow them in their freedom to respond to that. And of course we keep praying for, but it also means relationship. Like, all of this is like, without relationship, if I'm just talking to or at people, like, church teaches this, you shouldn't do that. Or, why did you feel the need to do this? Like, or like, what about this relationship makes you feel loved? It's like creating an authentic encounter and just literally loving people where they are without trying to convert or convince. Like, that's Jesus's job. Like, my vocation, all of our vocations is to love in reality how that person presents to us. If the person's open to dialogue and open to sharing. Like, sometimes, I'm not saying you got to get into screaming matches. That's not what I'm saying. I think most people, though, they don't really want to fight. They just want to be heard. So I think it's a space in the church for a deep, deep invitation to love people in reality and in the struggles, whatever they are.
I'm also just going to make a plug for Eden Invitation, is another ministry that's doing amazing work with LGBTQ identified folks. I walked with a friend of mine on this journey, and she was going on a retreat, and I was like, I kind of want to come. I know I'm not gay, but you guys have such a great community, and that's what the work is building communities of support. And to Sarah's point, really learning how to listen. We all think we're good listeners, and in reality, most of us are terrible listeners, because we're listening to tell you what we think you should do or what we think about the matter. And so I'm just gonna make a plug for the Into Life series that we did with the Sisters of Life. Teach yourself how to listen and receive the stories of other people well. We have time for one more question. Yeah.
This verse is to Virginia. One of my favorite documents of John Paul II that doesn't get a lot of attention is Dies Domini. That's on the Lord's Day. And in a recent issue of Imprint, your sisters talked a lot about rest. And in a year of rest, right, a Jubilee year, I just wonder if you could give us a few more comments on the role that leisure and rest plays in your ministry.
Wow, okay. Brian put me on the spot. We went to college together. Yeah.
Did everyone hear Brian's question?
It was basically that our Imprint magazine, which I think we have some outside. I don't know if we have it on Rest. I brought some. And how does like leisure and, what was the other word you said? Rest. You can already tell it's going to be a good answer. Rest, like, be a part of our ministry, though, and are part of our prayer. Like, I mean, I think I'm embarrassed to say that I didn't read it. I'm not a writer for it. I don't have a lot of time, guys, okay? No, but obviously leisure is something that we speak a great deal about. And yeah, I mean, I think for us, we talk about even every day, and, you know, we try to fit in what we call recreation, you know, personal recreation time, communal recreation time, something that's so restorative to the human person, that is essential. And, you know, that, yeah, and really honoring that seventh day, like that seventh day of creation where God rested, and not getting stuck kind of in the productivity, efficiency, functionality, usefulness mode, but really like having time to receive ultimately who we are from the Lord. So that gives you a little snapshot, but yeah, let's all go read that, Emperor.
Study group. You can do a study group.
That was good.
Yeah. Friends, thank you so much for your time and attention. At the end of the day, I think Abigail has a couple of announcements, and then we'll release for dinner.